It is my great pleasure today to introduce Britt Bunyard, and I very much hope you enjoy the talk.
Okay, so we'll start off the show. This will be some stories from this newest book I did, The Lives of Fungi, published by Princeton University Press. And it's like it has some things that are a lot like a lot of other mycological books and mushroom books and things like this. A lot of basics about fungi. Each chapter is kind of set up kind of how you would expect. There's a chapter on what fungi are, reproduction, all of the basic things. But then the second half of each chapter sort of launches into features of like really weird, wacky stuff that I assure you, there's stories in there that no one has ever heard, no one in the industry has ever heard before. And most of these have come from the pages of Fungi magazine. This is our 17th year in print. And, over the years I've filed away some of these really weird, neat stories of weird fungi that are important to us and in ways we didn't even know. So anyways, that's what a lot of the stories will be from today. Unfortunately, we'll start off the story today on sort of kind of a down note, and there'll be some real bummer slides. So a couple of bummer stories, but then there'll be more uplifting, and then there'll be tears of joy, I'm sure. So like pretty much all publications over the last couple of years, Fungi magazine has had articles on climate change and problems with the environment, how it's impacting us, and fungi as well. And in fact, just a couple of years ago, don't worry, you can't see the text. Doesn't matter that you can't read the text. A couple of years ago, we did this special feature devoted to a changing climate and how fungi are being looked at and studied to help solve some of these problems. In the centerfold of the magazine is what you see here. There was this montage of all these problems that are happening right now with the changing climate. Forest fires heating the planet, plastics in the ocean, invasive species, loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat, etc. And in most of these stories, these topics that are pointed out here, there was a story in the magazine that showed how people are using fungi to fix some of these problems, to make agriculture more resilient without pesticides, to clean up brown fields, fungi that can digest plastic, which is pretty cool, fungi that can be used to help restore forests after fire, etc. So it was a very uplifting and really interesting, for me personally, addition to do. And so now comes into the bubble slides. Now comes using some happy stories. So we'll be talking about how fungi can make a planet more resilient. And probably everyone knows a little bit about this. Fungi can make the planet more resilient because they renew, restore, revitalize soils. They can help plants fend off pathogens. There's natural flora and fauna on plants on us. There's natural flora and fauna. And can help them fend off things. But how they do this is what's actually being studied, because we know that fungi can do this. The how is a little bit harder to figure out because it involves, in many ways, ecological studies. So in any case, that's where my book came in, because I've done research on fungi for a long time, decades. And mostly I do research having to do with coevolution of fungi and other organisms, especially insects. And so a lot of these studies that other people have done along the lines are quite fascinating, and they're not just basic collecting mushrooms and things like that, but they're finding out what happens next. So the couple themes of the book are a little different than most other books that you probably will pick up on the topic, and hopefully you'll purchase a copy at some place from somebody, because despite what your spouse tells you, you really can't have too many books. There's always room in your house for more. But the two main themes of the book is, we thought we knew a lot about fungi, but it turns out a lot of what we knew ain't necessarily so. We're finding a lot of really basic things about fungi that are all around us that we thought we knew, but there's things about them we didn't really know. And then likewise, sort of piggybacked onto that is that much of the fungal kingdom is hidden in plain sight all around. So I'll show you some really amazing, unbelievably common fungi, some of which are ubiquitous over the whole planet. And this isn't something that now you have to go to Brazil or something to see. And some of these fungi would be things you can find literally right around your house. You've never heard of them. They're super common, and they have some neat stories in them. So anyways, and throughout the thing, every once in a while you'll see a QR code. So if you wanted to see something or find out more, you can just look at the QR code. I really don't. I just put them on there and people see the QR code. Okay, so then, that's right. Gotta have another show. So Princeton University Press, the publisher, has been running this deal where you can get 30% off. The cover price is only like $30 anyway, hardback book, and then that has copyback. So it's a pretty good deal to begin with. But you can type in BUN30 and get 30% off at the publisher, or you can probably maybe even get more off at Amazon. So anyways, that's a good place to get a copy. Okay, so now to get on with some happy news. So despite the fact that it's a bummer outside the door with the climate changing and bad things happening, right now we mycophiles are having sort of like our rebirth, because everyone seems to be wanting to get involved with mushrooms right now, find out about mushrooms, find out about like psychedelic mushrooms, and not just hippies anymore. Like everyone wants to know what's going on. But people want to get involved with their club. And so how many people here are pretty new to mushrooms? So like at least half the people. How many people have never picked wild mushrooms and eaten? How many people have picked wild mushrooms? Oh my God, look at all the hands that went up. I say that for the audience that's up there. That doesn't actually know. Nobody's. So, yes, okay, there's a lot of news. That's great, because it's a really exciting time to be a mushroom.
If you can project more your voice and stand closer, that would be great.
Okay. So, how to get involved. So right now, everywhere around North America, people are joining clubs and doing things like citizen science, making collections, and new species are actually being found quite all of the time by citizen science groups everywhere. How you can get involved besides joining a club like this? You can post stuff on iNaturalist or Mushroom Observer. Post your observations there. You can find out what your observation is because people will help you identify them. There's bio-blitzes and micro-blitzes happening all across North America all the time, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm now the new liaison for Mycological Society of America, the Academic Society of North America, with NAMA, which is the North American Mycological Society. This club is a member of NAMA. NAMA is sort of the umbrella group for all of the myco clubs in North America. And so you can join one or more of these, attend the annual forays, conferences. There's a lot of stuff going on, which is exciting. And most of it's leading to finding out what's outside right now, getting a handle on the biodiversity, before things continue to go away or habitats go away or species go away. And that's great. But I'm more interested in what the species are doing. So collecting and inventory, all super important, of course, but what they're doing in the environment and why they're important, that's actually what's more exciting to me. So again, that'll be what some of the topics are that we'll be covering today. So I've been showing some pictures of morels for a couple of reasons. One, it's almost morel season, and even if you've been back there drinking for an hour before this talk, you see morels on the screen, it's going to get your attention. It's just the way we are, right? Morels get people excited. But there's some things about morels, and even the most expert person in this room, there's probably things about morels that even they didn't know, because we're still finding out something. Everyone knows about morels. They're so common. It's one of the top edible mushrooms everywhere. North America, Europe, Asia, everyone loves them. But there's some of them that do really weird things in the environment. So here's a good example. This guy's homing in on a burn morel. So when you're picking morels out here in the springtime, there's a few different species. There's the big yellow ones, there's black ones, there's half-free ones, and then there's some sort of morel-like mushrooms around. There's also this type of a black morel called a burn morel. So if you've bought dried morels in the past, they probably were burn morels, and here's why. Pickers can go to really large forests, especially out west, like in the Rocky Mountains area, California, whatever, that are fire prone. Every year there's massive forest fires. The year after a massive forest fire, weirdly, the trees are burned up, everything else is burned up. The ground is now carpeted with morels like this. It's so weird. This has been known for centuries. In fact, it's been known for hundreds and hundreds of years in Europe. There's still laws on the books in many European countries. You may not set fire to a forest. And the reason is because people were setting fire to the forest that caused burn morels to happen. Why is this happening? No one really knew. Everyone knew it was a thing, but no one knew why. Was the smoke? somehow bringing in the spores, like a Pied Piper? Was the smoke or the heat or something releasing something into the soil, and now morels were fruiting, or what's going on? And furthermore, people that were familiar with these burn areas also knew there's other species of mushrooms that also fruit. They're not really culinarily important, so no one bothered to pick them. But there's other things that do this too. These seem to be fire-loving mushrooms. They're pyrophilous fungi. There's plants that seem to need fire too to open up their cones or whatever. Why not fungi? And it turns out that's actually what's going on. The morels were always in the soil there. In fact, they weren't even in the soil. They were in the plants living in the soil. They were always there. They never fruited. Nobody knows why. They were perfectly happy living as some sort of a symbiont with the plants. And then after a fire, they go into this sort of like, I'm out of here mode, go into sexual reproductive mode and make mushrooms. Well, that actually isn't too far-fetched or too weird. When you're looking for morels around here, you probably look for dead and dying elm trees. For sure, up in Pennsylvania or the Midwest where I live, you look around elm trees that have just died the previous year. Beneath those trees, there'll be a big flush of morel mushrooms coming up. So it's sort of the same thing. The morels were always there, living with that tree for 10, 20, 30 years or more, never fruiting. Maybe once or twice you'll see one mushroom. Then when the tree dies, there's a massive flush. Numerous times in my life, I've picked morels so much. And lots of people come to my house and pick with me in the Midwest. Numerous times we've been on a single tree where there are hundreds of morel mushrooms under one tree. It's pretty cool to see. But it's really no different than what's going on here. This guy's collecting buckets full of these bird roots. And like I say, there's other mushrooms too, like this little cup, Carbonaria, Geopixus carbonaria, this little pixie cup that also fruits after burns. And it's a morel relative. It's an ascomycete as well. It's a lot smaller. And nobody picks it for food. Same thing. This thing was always there. This has just been discovered not that long ago. It's always there, living inside the plants. I guess is some sort of a beneficial mutualistic symbiont. When the plants burn up, then this thing goes into fruiting mode. And it turns out a lot of these fungi actually help restore the forest after a fire because they both co-evolved. These trees have seen fire before. They've been there for millions of years. There's been forest fires as a part of the life cycle of the tree. They know what to do. And the fungi, as long as, just let them do their thing, they'll help the trees to get reestablished after a burn. And there's people that study that. I'll show you a slide next. Here's a really interesting phenomenon. So most likely we have burn morels here, but unless there's a big forest fire, we're never going to see them. I say this because in the Midwest where I live, we never see burn morels because there's no forest fires, except there was about 10 years ago in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there was a big, weird forest fire that got out of hand and burned up a big patch of national forest. Sure enough, the very next year there were burn morels. No one in history had ever recorded them before. They couldn't remember ever seeing anything like this. So what it means is they're probably around, and unless there's a fire, we suppress fire now, of course, because we don't want homes to burn up. But unless we let fire happen, these things won't fruit. Here's a fungus you've probably never heard of, Lactocephalum mylitti, the stonemaker mushroom. Has anyone ever heard of it? It grows in Australia. Super rare mushroom. If you go on Mushroom Observer, iNaturalist, whatever, you won't see many observations. It's considered very, very rare. But it's not very rare. In fact, it's so unbelievably common that Aboriginal people, before Europeans arrived, knew about it and they ate it all the time. And in fact, the mushroom's common name besides stonemaker is Aboriginal bread or native bread. And this is what these big underground sclerotia look like. It's like a big tuber, very starchy, and that picture sliced in half. And Aborigines would collect this thing. So how they would find this thing was they would be burning areas to cause regrowth of plant life, so game would come through and they'd hunt them, just like indigenous people in North America would do. So they knew about this thing. It was quite common. Europeans arrived, and just like Europeans in North America, they've suppressed fire to keep them from happening. And now this mushroom basically went into hiding and no one saw it anymore. Until 3 years ago when massive wildfires hit all of Australia, all the way around the entire massive country. There were fires everywhere, and everyone was reporting scenes like this. There were hundreds and hundreds of these things. They'd never heard of this. They'd never seen it before. It was always there, but part of its niche and life cycle was missing. It needed fire to turn this thing on and to cause it to fruit. As you can see, it makes a great big mushroom. You would see it if it was there. So it was pretty cool. So these fungi help after a fire the trees to get a jump start. Mycorrhizal fungi, pyrophilous fungi help the plants. This is Camille Stevens-Rumon. She works at Colorado State University. She's an expert on post-fire regeneration of the forest, and she's even been a lecturer at the Telluride Mushroom Festival. So she's standing in an area that was burned. In fact, it probably burned because her husband, who studies the bark beetles out west, beetles he studies probably came through, killed the trees, and now that's fuel standing there for a fire, and the fire comes through and burns up the trees. So it's bad when a fire comes through and burns an entire mountainside or several mountains. That's bad. But the real problem hasn't happened yet. The real problem happens with nothing on the soil, and now rainy season comes and starts washing away the topsoil. Nothing starts growing for another whole season, more rains, the soil eventually can be completely washed away, and you can have a desert. Now you have a real problem. So, and if you don't think it's a real problem, you can see aerial maps of the island of Hispaniola. The west side of the island is Dominican Republic. It's very lush and green. The east side of the island is Haiti, where they cut all of the trees to turn into firewood and not allow regeneration of trees. And it's becoming basically a desert. You can see the border of the two countries easily from the air and space. It's unbelievably stark what can happen when you don't allow or foster tree regrowth. So Camille works on mycorrhizal fungi and pyrophilous fungi that help benefit trees. And you can see these trees here, only probably 2 years old, and they're getting a big jump start. They're growing more than a foot per year and holding onto the soil to keep it from washing away. So this has become a hot topic in mycology, post-fire restoration, and having lots and lots of fires anymore. So it stands to reason that there's plenty of things to study. So another thing to maybe hit upon from this center poll was introduced species. So in North America, we have lots of introduced species, including fungi. Most of them are serious pathogens of crop plants, horticultural plants, forest plants, all around. Small fungi that are pathogens and prey on plants. Until recently, we really had no invasive mushroom species, weirdly. So most of the things that were invasive and not native that were fungi were things like the fungus that causes Dutch elm disease, or chestnut blight, or, you could go down the list. If you name the fruit tree, I could probably tell you a plant pathogen that's come into North America and is causing a problem. Well, that all changed in the 2000s with this weird golden oyster mushroom, Porotus citrineo-pileatus, started popping up in the Midwest. And people were like, I'm collecting some sort of a weird, I think it's an oyster mushroom. It's tasty, but I don't remember ever seeing it before. Do you know about this? And also some people in the East had started reporting it. So people researchers at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, Tom Volk, Todd Osmondson, and grad students started studying this thing to try to track down where this thing was, where it maybe came from, how fast it was spreading, what it's doing in the environment. So Pleurotus are wood rot species. So they're not mycorrhizal or phytotrophic. They rot dead trees. And it looks very similar to another species that's a popular cultivated one, Pleurotus cornucopes. Both of these were considered the same species for quite a long time, but different varieties of the same species. It's really hard to tell them apart, frankly. Both are cultivated. That's probably how this invasive one probably arrived in the New World and got loose. People were probably cultivating it, and spores get loose. And Pleurotus species in general are fairly aggressive wood rot fungi, and that's why they're so popular with growers, because it's super easy to grow them on any type of cellulosic material. And so on the walk today, I asked if anyone had seen this, and some people had said, has anyone seen yellow oyster mushrooms? They come out pretty much right at the end of morel season. It's been my experience. They're super tasty, again, an invasive species, so by all means, eat them all up. There's no bag limit and stuff like this. Anyways, it'll be interesting to see how far and wide this spreads. There's now at least one other invasive mushroom that seems to be spreading through southern North America, and even some stinkhorns have arrived and maybe are starting to spread around the mulch as well. So, of course, we'll see more and more of this stuff as time goes on, because humans travel all around the planet is bringing things home in bags and on shoes and stuff like that. So these are invasive species. One other invasive species to note is this Amanita muscaria. This is Amanita muscaria variety Muscaria, the European fly agaric. We have Amanita muscaria, a different variety here in the east that's mostly yellow, maybe kind of orange in the center. You've all seen it probably. It's pretty common with white pine and some other trees too. Birch, if you happen to find birch growing somewhere, you can partner with that. It's a pretty common mushroom. Out in the Rockies and west in North America, that's where we have the red variety, but they can be red or yellow or white or cream color, so they can actually be kind of variable. I point this one out because this is not a saprobic mushroom. This is a rot stuff or decomposant. This is a biotrophic species. This grows with trees, so it appears to be growing from the soil here. It's not. It's growing from the root tips of its host trees, and it's responsible for the trees living there, and likewise the trees are responsible for it. So I point this out because when wood rot fungi get loose and spread around, that's one thing. You could debate about maybe how bad it is for the environment. If something like a mycorrhizal comes into a habitat, this surely will be very bad for some organisms. And here's why. So this is a partner with the trees that it maybe came from its old habitat Europe, and now it jumps onto our native trees. But you said it was good for the trees and helps them grow. Yes. So, but it's very aggressive and it forces out the other native mycorrhizal fungi that would have been a host on that tree. It's maybe pushed them out. They can maybe push them out of the entire environment. Now what? Well, those mycorrhizal fungi maybe were partners with other species that this can't partner with. In fact, it could have been a partner, maybe the only partner with some other type of a tree. Now that other tree no longer has its obligate symbiont to live with, and that could be devastating. The same thing for sure happens with pollinators. Non-native bees, beetles, flies, other things. These all are pollinators. They can arrive in a new habitat if they are better at pollinating a certain maybe rare flower than its normal native pollinator. It could force that pollinator out. And now, if that pollinator was the only pollinator for some flowers, which we know lots of examples of, well, now that native flower without a pollinator cannot reproduce anymore, and without human help or some other manipulation, it could go extinct. So anyway, so stuff like this is something to be on the lookout for. Amanita muscaria from Europe is now all over the world. I've personally seen it while leading myco tours in Chile. It's moved down there. It's in Africa. I've seen it in Australia, and pretty much anywhere humans have gone from Europe with European plants, it's traveled with it. It's now even known from North America. European Amanita muscaria is known from Alaska, a small population in California, and even a small population, believe it or not, in New England. So what's going to happen is it's going to keep spreading throughout North America, like Amanita palmoides, the death cap, has now moved up and down the coast. Remains to be seen, but I suspect it will because it seems to be quite aggressive and spreads wherever it ends up. This is a picture of a spot we were in Chile when I led a myco tour there with Gary Linkoff and Juliana Furci. We were down in Patagonia in our 4 vans driving from one 4A site to another, and we crossed through this massive plantation that a big lumber company had started. And so nowadays we know you can't simply buy land in some other place and bring your trees, like American spruce trees or lumber trees. You can't just bring them down there and plant them because the land's cheap and have a really cheap forest. You have to also bring their fungal partners with them. You have to inoculate it first, otherwise they won't grow. Actually, nobody knew that, just a few decades ago, and started multi-billion-dollar farms that failed because they didn't know simple mycology. So these trees, I think they were spruce, maybe like a jack pine. They were brought, obviously, this muscaria. So we're crossing through miles and miles of this plantation. And for miles and miles, all you see are just these trees in rows and millions, trillions of red Amanita muscaria. It was the craziest thing you've ever seen. So naturally, we had to stop and get out and had like a mushroom fight and they're throwing mushrooms at everybody. It was unbelievable. It's the most mushrooms I've ever seen at one time. It was just incredible. So neat to see, but it can be devastating in the environment. So stay tuned. So another theme that kind of runs throughout the book, since there's a lot of talk of symbionts in the book, is this Pacific Northwest Haida people's mantra. Everything depends on everything else. So you'll see a lot of stories here that involve multiple species hanging out and doing stuff. And so maybe keep that sort of theme in the back of the mind. Okay, so at the beginning there was a number of hands that went up. Probably half the people here consider themselves newbies, not maybe super knowledgeable about fungi. So here's a few fungal basics. Even if you're an expert, couldn't help to have a refresher course. So fungi are eukaryotes. So what does that mean? All life on Earth is a prokaryote or eukaryote. Bacteria are prokaryotes, meaning their cells do not have organelle, do not have membrane-bound organelles. All other life has, within their cell, the organelles are compartmentalized in membranes. So the nucleus, other parts of the cell are within the membrane. Bacteria don't have that. They have a single chromosome that just kind of floats around the cell. So fungi are eukaryotes, we're eukaryotes. Fungi are also very diverse, covering pretty much any habitat you can imagine. I'll even show you some extreme examples. And then most fungi are probably not even known, the vast majority. Maybe 1 to 5% of all fungi on the planet we actually know, believe it or not. And I can explain why that is. But back to this eukaryote thing. So I said that we're eukaryotes just like fungi. So how are we different? So the eukaryotic kingdoms of life are plants, animals, fungi, and protozoans. So fungi have a cell wall, chitin. Plants have a cell wall of cellulose. Humans have a cell wall of nothing because we don't have a cell wall. We just have the cell membranes. And then protozoans are sort of small, mostly single-celled other little dudes that differ in a number of other ways than those other things. So I said they're pretty diverse. Here's an example. So when you think of fungi, if you learned anything about fungi in school, what you probably learned was they need a lot of moisture, high humidity, rainfall, and then you see mushrooms and stuff. So what that means is dry parts of the planet, deserts, beaches, Antarctica, of course no fungi, because it's just too dry, it's too hot, whatever. That may be true for some life. It may be too hot and too dry and too awful, UV light too intense for a lot of organisms, not fungi, believe it or not. So fungi can inhabit pretty much all habitats you've ever heard of, sandy beaches, deserts, etc. Here's an extreme example. This is Antarctica, a massive continent that is almost totally denuded of life because it's way too cold, way too windy, UV light is way too intense, all of those things. So fungi would probably seem like the last thing that would live there. This is a scene from central Antarctica, or in an open area that's ice-free. Looks pretty much like a big desert, right? What you see in this image, besides a lot of boulders and some sort of a scrubby plant, this is all probably one single species of plant. That's about all you see there. You don't see amphibians, fish, birds, snakes. You don't see any trees. You don't see much of nothing but rocks and this one plant. There's probably a couple types of insects, maybe. That's about it. But what I can tell you is in this scene here, fungi are the dominant organism. Isn't that hard to believe? Fungi are everywhere. They figured it out. So the UV light is too intense. The wind is too windy. The dryness is too dry. The cold is really cold. So where the fungi living? Inside of these rocks. They are endolithic, within rocks. If you break these porous rocks open, what you'll see are these weird colored bands just under the surface that are kind of black and green. What's going on? This is a type of a lichen that lives inside the rock, just below the surface. Sunlight can still penetrate the rock, so the lichen, which if you know about lichens, we saw lots of them today. If you don't know about lichens, you need to know about lichens because they're super cool and they're everywhere and they're always there, right? A lot of mushrooms weren't out today, but the lichens are still out. So lichen is mostly a fungus body. It has as symbionts with it, sort of inside, a photobiont of a cyanobacterium or an algae, or in some cases they have both. And in a lot of cases, there's more than one fungus too. So it's like a community living in a place where really nothing else can grow. These type of lichens live inside these rocks, just below the surface, so they're not zapped by the UV, and they're not dried out so much by the drying winds, but they still get sunlight. Look at these pictures. Who's ever heard of something like this? People have been to Antarctica and had to have seen these rocks because they're everywhere for millions of miles. This was just discovered not that long ago. The dominant organism there is a fungus. Isn't that wild? To me, that's just wild. So they can live just about anywhere. So when you go to the beach, there are sand-loving fungi that partner with the beach grasses and the beach trees and stuff that live along the beach. In desert, there's desert truffles. They're everywhere. And the people that live there, they know about it. We don't know about it because we wouldn't expect to see them. So we were pondering today in the bald cypress swamp, those trees there for sure have fungal partners. But nobody's really studied them because, of course, there's no fungi. It's a lot of water, but of course there's fungi there. We just haven't looked. So if someone wants a project to discover a new species, that would be one probably surefire place because I don't think anybody really knows much about the mycorrhizae of bald cypress. Okay, so here we'll do some factoids about the chemistry and physiology about fungi, or fun facts, fungi facts. So again, going back to your school days, if you learned anything at all about fungi, which most of us really didn't in school, you learned fungi rot things, they're decomposers, and isn't this great? Because were it not for fungi, we would just be buried in plant matter, piling up in all these dead carcasses. And wow, fungi do one good service for us, so what do we do? Turns out a couple things. First of all, most fungi actually are not decomposers, they're mostly biotrophs. But the ones that do decompose things are pretty cool because they can break down stuff that really nothing else can. And that's why woody material from plants really did pile up on the earth for millions of years and nothing happened to it. We know that because it turned into fossil fuels. We also know that at some point, wood rot fungi came along. We saw them in the woods today. So at one point, wood rot fungi came along. Fungi figured out how to use all of this dead woody material. It was free carbohydrates sitting there. They could just figure out how to break down the cellulose and this lignin, these big tough molecules that makes up wood, and they figured out how to do it. From that time on, if you look at the layers of soil, from that time on, fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, oil, and there's a line where there's lots and lots of spores in the soil and pollen and other stuff. No more fossil fuels. Wood rot fungi came on the scene and have been rotting stuff ever since, and there won't be any fossil fuels ever again. It's just not going to happen because all this stuff gets rotted. That's not sitting around. I guess if you buried stuff in a landfill, that's not going to rot. But that's one small exception. So I mentioned, fungi can break down woody material, which is kind of a special thing. Bacteria and other organisms can't do it. I know you've seen herbivores munching grass and browsing trees and stuff like that. They're eating it, but they're not digesting it. They're only digesting it because they have a fungus in their gut that can break it down. Or in the case of like wood wasps and wood boring beetles and termites, things that seemingly eat wood, they again have a fungal symbiont that breaks it down for them. Carpenter ants, same thing. They all rely on fungi. You see them, the food's going in their mouth, but that's not where the digestion happens. It happens in their gut, or maybe they introduce a fungus like wood wasps and beetles and things. They bring a fungus to the tree, lay the eggs, drop off the fungus. The eggs sit there for a year or two. After the wood rot fungi have done their business, now the eggs hatch and those larvae start eating this broken down wood. Isn't that wild? This really happens. It's hard to believe. So here's what happens. When you're in the woods today, or any day, you've probably seen well-rotted logs, and it looked like one of these two pictures, right? So this red-brown, blocky-looking material, you can tell it used to be a tree, but it's fallen apart now. Or in other cases, you've seen logs that are well-rotted, they look kind of white and stringy. You probably thought, this is just what happens when that species of tree dies, falls down in the woods. It falls apart like this. This type of tree, it dies, falls down in the woods, and falls apart this way. And that's just what happens. If you thought that, did you think that? Yeah, you'd be wrong. It really had almost nothing to do with the tree. It had everything to do with the fungus that got to it first and started rotting. In general, conifer wood will break down this way because the fungi that attack conifer wood, in general, are brown rot fungi. But it doesn't have to be that way. And hardwoods can be end up looking this way or the brown rot way. Mycologists are pretty clever about naming stuff. So fungi that rot wood and leave behind brown stuff, they call that brown rot fungi. And they're basically breaking down the cellulose, the cell wall material of the plants, and leaving behind the lignin. Because while these fungi are pretty crafty and can do this thing of breaking down the cellulose, lignin is another big molecule they never figured out really how to do. So these fungi are pretty much exclusively basidiomycete fungi, so things that form mushrooms like we're familiar with, polypores, etc., like we saw today, are brown rock. A lot of them are brown rock fungi. It includes things like these guys here. Phomopsis pinnacle is a red belted polypore. Pholinus species, which is another type of polypore I'll show you in a second. The Dyer's polypore, Phalus schweigentii, Ledoporus, which is the sulfur shell or chicken of the woods. These are all brown rock fungi. So if you saw them attached to the tree, you would expect to see them living like this. White rock fungi, there's basidiomycetes and ascomycetes that rot wood this way. Basically what's going on here is the fungus is really good at rotting the lignin part, the sort of cement that holds the cells together. It's good at rotting the lignin and also a little bit the cellulose. Scientists think that maybe they can partially break down the cellulose, maybe to get it out of the way so they can eat the lignin. In any case, a lot of the cellulose is left behind, so it looks white and stringy like this. So some of the groups of mushrooms involved that do this are things like Armillaria, which are the honey mushrooms, Chlorotis, as I mentioned before, the oyster mushrooms, Ganodermas. These are things like artist calm. Trametes, like turkey tail. We saw lots of turkey tail today. They're a white rock fungus. And then there's some ascomycetes like these guys here. Xylaria, which are the dead man's fingers. Those are white rock fungi. And they also do some other neat things too, but you'll have to buy the book to find out about it. The zizas are kind of brown cup fungi. They're pretty ubiquitous. And also Chlorosiboria. The reason I have one name in each column in color is because I'll show you some other pictures in a minute about what they do. So, and without further ado, we can move on to Pholinus. So if you've encountered Pholinus before, it's obviously it's a brown rock fungus. It's a polypore that lives on a tree. It's a heart rot fungus. So this is an aspen tree here in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and it has Pholinus growing inside of it, rotting the heartwood of the tree. The interior of the tree is dead wood. Each year puts on a new layer on the outside of it. It gets bigger and bigger. The dead wood in the center, a lot of fungi can attack this and rot it, and maybe the trees probably don't mind so much because it's already dead wood to begin with. As long as the fungus stays in there, probably doesn't much matter. It takes a really long time before the heartwood is rotted so much that the tree's weakened and it breaks, so they probably don't mind too much. With Pholinus, you have to look pretty close to see it because where the branches break off of one of these trees, it leaves behind these kind of craggy scars. And so the polypore itself, the conch hanging up the side, kind of looks like that. So it's kind of hard to see. So this picture here, I have kind of aimed up so you can see the brown pores on the underside of Pholinus. And this is really what the only part anyone ever sees. They're like, okay, well, here's a fungus here, here's a fungus here. Well, it turns out, this tree, maybe the entire length of the tree and the heartwood is filled with fungus. The fungus could be huge. Fungi are considered microbes, but at the same time, they can be massive. They can be macrobes, I guess you could call them. So wouldn't it be cool if you could rip one of these conchs off or go inside the tree to see what's going on the inside? Because that's where the excitement is. And so through the miracle of photography, here's what this looks like. If you were to go on the inside side of one of those conchs, you would see, just as I showed you in the previous photo, brown cuboidal rot here. This is where the fungus entered. It was probably where a branch broke off. That leaves an entry place for the fungus to get inside and start rotting this dead material. And so sure enough, this is where the fungus has been rotting the tree. But wait, there's something else to see here too. This is the bark of the tree. So that's not really very exciting. But there's something else going on here. Spreading out away from this area of rot, there's these red arrows indicating these black lines. And so we call wood that has these black lines spalted wood. So if you know about woodworking or wood turning or anything like this, you probably know about spalted wood, right? You've probably seen bowls with these black lines of guitars or cabinetry or whatever, sometimes made with so-called bird's eye maple or curly maple. There's no such thing as bird's eye maple or curly maple. There's just maple. If it has these black lines of spalting in it, that means there's a fungus that got into a burl or some sort of a wound on the tree. And now the woodworker knows this is something that's interesting and will rip this piece of wood off the tree or cut it off the tree or cut the tree down and then turn interesting objects about it. But what's more interesting is what's going on. So here's what's going on. So this is tree. This is living tree. This is fungus. This is part of the tree that the fungus wants. It wants to rot this wood. So the fungus starts growing into the wood, and now the tree and other organisms there, presumably, that maybe come through this wound, they're all starting to do battle. The fungus starts making melanin, just like our cells make melanin when they're under attack from ultraviolet light and frankly, pretty much all organisms can make melanin for the same purpose, to protect cells from damage from ionizing radiation, chemical problems, poisons, pathogens inside of us produce melanin to evade our immune system. This has been used, down through history. Fungi use it in this case to put up sort of a wall defense around where it's growing. So if you can see this in 3D, it's actually like a cone of material, and inside is where the fungus is growing and rotting, and on the outside is where the fungus hasn't made it. So isn't that pretty cool? You can see this around your house too with wood rot fungi. So here's an example. Oh, here's an example next. Sorry. Here's some examples of wood products made from spalted wood. Here's a really cool pipe made from maple wood. You can see this really pretty maple wood here. It's bleached here because the fungus is growing through here and bleaching the wood, and on the sort of on the border here is where this spalted material makes for a pretty pattern. Something else about fungi that invade wood and spalted or change the color of it involves a piece of sort of antique woodworking from the Kent area of England, Tunbridge Wells. So has anyone ever heard of this type of an antique from Britain called Tunbridge ware? It was very popular for a few decades in the 1800s in this area near Kent, England, in the south of England, where there's a bunch of spas. People would go there for recreation or use healing waters or whatever. And so, as will happen any place where a lot of tourists are coming, there will be people to sell things to the tourists, trinkets and whatnot. So woodworkers that were busy making all kinds of other things figured, they can cash on these tourists by making something small that people can buy and take home as a little tourist, as a tourist trinket. So the woodworkers already had developed this skill of wood inlay that they, I think, presumably learned from Italians. To take really thin pieces of wood, and you can make nature scenes, geometric designs, and whatnot. But the woodworkers in this area had something special about their wood. They had different colors of wood that they could incorporate. So if you see in some Tunbridge where there'll be like a nature scene with trees, the foliage part of the tree will be green wood, and there's even pink wood, etc. So the green wood was a type of wood called green oak. There's no such thing as green oak. It was oak that was attacked by a special fungus, and so that was key to this woodworker having this special kind of wood. His whole key was knowing a mycologist that knew how to spot this special kind of wood. It's lying there on the forest floor with bark on it and everything, but something told him inside that wood was green-colored wood, and it's not stained or anything. This is permanently green from the fungus. And so, anyways, I got really excited when I was writing this book in writing about Tunbridge ware, and my three editors, all three were based in England. They're like, what's the deal with this Tunbridge ware? Everyone has one of these boxes at their home with these little green and pink pieces. That's a fungus that did that? I'm like, yeah, I just thought everybody knew that. They're like, no, you have to put like a special feature in there. We didn't know. I'm like, you think that's cool? Read on. There's even older stuff. But anyways, so I did see some heads nod that they knew about Tunbridge ware. So my particular box that I have at home was made in 1890. So it's pretty old, and it's super beautiful. It has all of this amazing wood inlay. It's quite a piece of art. But here's some fungi that spalt wood around your house that you can track down. Has anyone ever heard of this little fungus, Lophoderma pinastri? Okay, so exactly so for the viewers at home, there's, hundreds of people in this audience, and exactly one hand went up. So, and that's pretty typical. This is one of the most common fungi of the northern hemisphere of the entire planet. Maybe the most common fungus, I don't know. It lives inside of conifer needles, and no one really, despite being common, no one really knows much about it. So it lives inside of the conifer needles, maybe as a partner with the tree. Maybe it's a pathogen that doesn't do very much. We don't know. Needles fall off the tree, and now it goes into reproductive mode, kind of like the burn morel thing. It goes into reproductive mode and starts making its mushrooms or its fruit bodies, which aren't really much to see. I'll admit they're these little pustules, these little bumps on the needles, but that's what it does. I don't know if it's edible, if that's the next question. I don't have culinary notes. But one thing that's really cool that you might notice where all these little red arrows are, there's a perfectly straight black line all the way across the needles. This is spalting the plant material. So presumably, between this spalted zone and this spalted zone, this is probably this one organism in here, and it's walled this off to keep this guy over here, and this is its zone, and now it's rotting away at that little needle, and then it makes spores, and they blast up into the tree, and then the whole cycle starts all over. Isn't that weird? You can see this around your home. These, I think, are Scotch pine needles, so you probably have those, but you can look around your house. You probably have other needles and stuff like this. Super common, yet hidden in plain sight. Pretty neat. Okay, so what else can I tell you? Okay, so we established that fungi mostly are not decomposers. Some are, but they mostly are not. They're mostly actually symbionts, which also means biotrophic. Symbiont is a situation where two organisms' lives are completely intertwined. So symbiont does not necessarily mean two organisms that mutually benefit one another. A pathogen, a parasite, that is a symbiont of its host. For sure, it's there at the detriment of its host, but they're still symbionts. Oops. Mutualists are when two symbionts both benefit one another. So I point this out because in reading material, newspapers, magazines, you see symbiont a lot anymore used, and the writer always means it to mean mutually beneficial. It doesn't have to be that. If you read ecological books, some ecologists even consider like predator and prey situations, those are symbionts. Well, if you're a predator, you're not there at the benefit of the prey, let me just tell you. So anyways, so that's what symbionts are. So most fungi seem to be symbionts or biotrophic. And in fact, probably most life on the planet are parasites. If you think about it, every species of life has at least one species-specific pathogen or parasite. And that's overly simplistic. I mean, every species probably has 2 or 3 or a dozen species-specific parasites. You can quickly do the numbers that most life seems to be a parasite on the planet. So parasites are not necessarily a bad thing, is sort of the point of that. So fungi are, we see them on our plants and whatnot. There's not a lot of fungi that are pathogens on animals compared to, say, bacteria, but there for sure are fungi that can attack and kill every type of life you can think of. So I'll show you a few of the weirdest examples. Even slime molds are not immune to fungi. Have you ever seen this beautiful violet-colored slime mold? You probably have. It's actually more common than you think. So the dog vomit slime mold, which you will see around in the season when you're traipsing around with your club, every once in a while you'll find one that's not kind of a gray color or peach-colored one. It'll be this pretty purple one. And if you mistake it for some new species or something, you'll be forgiven. The authority on this group of slime molds had collected lots and lots of specimens in their museums. It was later found, not all that long ago, that some of these mislabeled, like Physarum, whatever, variety, Violacea, turns out it wasn't a variety, it had a parasite on it, but the expert didn't bother to look under the microscope to see that it had a fungus growing on the slime mold. So these are actually fairly common. I see them once in a while, certainly every year. So they're around here. So nobody in the club seen one before? Be on the lookout. So this is the fungus Nectriopsis violacea. It does nothing but attack and kill slimes. Pretty cool. So here's another one to be on the lookout for that I'm certain you have it here. You've probably never seen it. So this is the genus Sporophagomyces, which is, oh, by the way, I better check my time. Oh, I've got so much time. I've got hours. You said 3 hours. Okay. So has anyone ever heard of this genus? So today I heard a lot of common names. I don't know a lot of common names of mushrooms, and some of them aren't really that common names, frankly. I grew up learning scientific names, and so if I use a lot of scientific names, it is, of course, for you to think that I'm a smarty pants, but also just because a lot of fungi and mushrooms until recently never had common names at all. So once you start getting into the gist of what the name is and can, get in tune with it, they actually make a lot of sense. So this genus Sporophagomyces, spore-eating fungus. Sporophagomyces. This is a fungus that lives on other fungi, and it makes its living by eating spores. Isn't that wild? So this is a big Ganoderma here. Ganoderma is these artist conchs. They're everywhere on dead and dying trees. Can't miss them. If you look on the underside, you can resist scratching your name, Kilroy and Spear, which is hard to do. You might see a mold growing. If you look closely at the mold, the fungus lands on the conch, and creeps underneath and just sits there. And as the spores, these mushrooms make tremendous amounts of spores, trillions of spores. This thing just sits right underneath, collecting the spores and eating them. And apparently that's all it does. Isn't that wild? So the reason I point this out is because when you go on a foray and the mushrooms come into the picnic table or wherever you're set up and everyone's going to identify them, if you're one of the newbies, here's what the experts will do when you make the mistake, as we all did when we were newbies, of bringing in rotten mushrooms that look like crap. And they're like, there's no way I can identify this is rotten. And you brought in another Kong that you picked up off the ground and it gets swatted away and you'll be browbeaten and everything. Tell them, hold on. It may not have been an old rotten mushroom. It could just be a fresh mushroom that's attacked by another fungus. So this right here's a picture of, I think again, that was collected in Illinois, in the club that I belong to, and it was moldy, and someone was taken to task for bringing in an old fungus. But I think it was Patrick Leacock, the expert of the Illinois club, was feeling is like, wow, this is a very solid feeling mushroom. It feels fresh, and looked at it with the loop, and sure enough, the mold growing on it wasn't mold growing on it. It was this Sporophagamyces that had taken up shop and was collecting the spores. So this was a really exciting thing. It turns out it's actually fairly common in the area. So be on the lookout. Now, if you bring in a polypore that fell off the tree and it's got mold all over it and it's riddled with bug holes and stuff that weighs like next to nothing, don't bring that because that is a rock condition. But ever seen one of these, Mitch? I bet it's in the area. It's one of those things that hidden in plain sight, right? So I got a lot of requests over the last couple years to talk about Last of Us because I guess it was popular. Are cordyceps and zombifying fungi real? Can it happen to me? How can I keep it from happening to me? I think it has already happened to me. Is there something showing back here? So the zombifying fungi are pretty cool. They attack all kinds of animals, pretty much all arthropods and things like these creatures here. Ants, of course, get attacked by them. They're related to, we saw xylarian fungi today, like hypomyces or hypoxylons and stuff like that. So they're in that same group of fungi, and they have a reproductive structure that's pretty similar. I mean, it lives inside the ant, takes over the ant, and when it's ready to start fruiting, it zombifies the ant, uses hormonal control, tells the ant what to do, where to climb up on the tree and to die and hold on, and it produces this stalk with this stroma here. And inside the stroma, this is basically like one of those hypoxylons or a dead man's finger, basically. If you were to slice it in half, so here's the ant, here's the neck, here's the stalk of the fungus. If you slice the stroma in half, you'd see these parathecia embedded in that stroma. So everyone knows about what like a dead man's fingers is, right? It's a Xylaria polymorpha. There's other Xylarias around. If you've not seen one, for sure, you'll show them this year for sure. They're always out. Anyways, it's kind of this creepy, weird stalk or club, and often there's several of them sticking up. And it's coal black. And if you take the stalk and snap it in half, it's quite tough and rubbery, but you can snap it. It's coal black on the outside. It has like little bumps, looks like these guys here. It's very white on the inside, which is convenient because the parathecia, the part where the spores are made, are these little vessels just under the surface of this club on the inside, and they're black too. So you see like around the perimeter, like little black teardrops. It's the parathecia, it's these guys here. And if you have a hand lens, you can see what's going on in the parathecia. In this case, these are the bumps that you see here. That's the opening or the hole of this parathecium, and inside is where the asci are. They make the ascospores and they blast out the results. And so these are zombifying fungi, and Xylaria and hypoxylon fungi right here do this too. So what comes next is then the poor creature gets the spores inside of them. This fungus germinates and starts growing. It's weird that the fungus can do other things in nature, break down wood or whatever, but it can also figure out how to get inside of a completely different organism and make chemicals that seem to convince the organism that this is what I should be doing. In the case of this ghost moth, refer to this cordyceps, right? Or Ophicordyceps sinensis. This is a very popular item in Eastern medicine to collect these things. Anyways, this fungus gets into the caterpillar. This caterpillar would turn into a ghost moth when it pupates and turns it into an adult the next year. In this case, it's not going to, of course, because the fungus is growing inside of it. At the end of the season, when it's time for this thing, it's not full-size larva. It's time for it to pupate. The fungus says, not so fast. Something else is going to happen. You're not going to like how this is going to turn out. So the caterpillar normally would burrow underground to pupate, just like caterpillars around here do and other arthropods. But instead of the way you would normally dig down as deep as you can, we're not doing it that way this time. You're going to dig down just below the surface because I have a stalk that's going to come out the next season. You can't be too deep, otherwise the stalk doesn't work. Also, conveniently, I know you want to be head down. That's how we normally dig because our diggers are here. You're going to have to dig down into the soil and orient yourself head up, which is also more convenient for me. Springtime comes and the stalk emerges and then blasts spores, which somehow get into the caterpillar. The caterpillar eats the grass. These grow out in the Himalayas, in the plains there. There's no trees. It's just a vast plain area in the mountains, millions of acres. There's tremendous amounts of these things. And in fact, in the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China, which is a massive, massive region, something like 85% of the entire economy is based on that. They're worth more than gold by weight, a lot more than that. It's worth so much as a medicine in Chinese traditional medicine. So as you can imagine, a lot of people are collecting this stuff. In fact, in Tibet and even parts of Nepal where these things are collected, literally everyone collects them. All shops, schools, businesses, homes, everything goes down. Every single person goes into the mountains and crawls along to collect all these things because they're worth so much money. Millions and millions of dollars. So the people that come to buy and sell, going to say, the people get ripped off or whatever, their armies, their automatic weapons. Yes, there's all of that. It's just like the Wild West when the gold rush was. This is worth so much money. So this is like the most known thing on the planet because it's worth so much. Isn't that amazing? So much pressure on these things and so much money to harvest them. I know what you're going to ask. How come these things don't go extinct? Are they about to go extinct? You'd think they would probably go extinct if every single one gets collected. More on that in a second. There's going to be a part 2. That's even weirder. So this group of fungi that parasitize these arthropods, they parasitize other organisms too. In fact, fungi. And you can see them around here on bugs out in the forest. But if you're careful and keen-eyed and spot one and dig down, and you can see it's yellow rhizomore, you can find that in this case, this is attached to a truffle. This is the truffle of the genus Elaphomyces, the deer truffles. They're common around here, so you can find this cordyceps fruiting on them around here. So why is this QR code here? So this picture actually was taken in Italy, and so it's this point in the show that I have yet another shameless ad for you, because I do myco tours every year all over the world, and we go to Italy multiple times a year. So if you click on take a photo of that, you can find out about these myco tours. But I do them other parts of the world too. I've been to Thailand and Laos and Australia, and led a tour with Gary Linkoff to Chile. I've been twice with Rick Silver, who's sitting right here, to Nepal in the Himalayas for an unbelievable trip, and Rick is continuing to go. So if you want to find out more, see him after the show. But anyways, looking for fungi is a really good excuse to go to other parts of the world and see really crazy things. Now, as far as, so this was taken in Italy. This is the Elaphomyces in Italy. The one that you might find around here looks more like this guy here. Have you guys seen this one before? So these cordyceps are pretty common. Unfortunately, they often don't turn up at forays. When they turn up at forays, it's usually in a really dry year. People are kind of crawling around maybe big tree stumps or places where there's moisture, thinking, yeah, there might be a mushroom around there. And then often you see like these little match head looking things sticking up. And if the person knows ahead of time, this might be cordyceps, carefully digs down and you can dig up the host too, and win all of the praise from the members of the club because you brought in something that was really cool and exciting. So be on the watch for that. Okay, so more about this. So yes, this thing probably would go extinct, you would imagine, with everyone collecting it. But here's something that was just found out. It seems that the spores blasted from this fruit body, they may land on plants or something, and the fungus may eat them, or maybe it breathes in the spores. I don't know. Turns out the spores being blasted from this fruit body, they probably don't even matter. Because what was just discovered not all long ago, this fungus that everyone knows about, it's worth more than gold by weight. Everyone's been using this in Asia for centuries. It has something else about its life cycle no one knew until recently. Looking around, inside the plants, covering millions and millions of acres, some of the plants have the fungus inside the plant. And that's probably how the caterpillars picking it up. Isn't that wild? Something so basic about the biology was totally not known until just recently. So it turns out the fungus probably doesn't need the caterpillar at all to survive. It travels with the plant. Who knows? And the more we look at inside of plants, the more we find there's endophytic fungi living inside of them. What are they doing? In some cases we know they produce toxins that prevent herbivory by insects and other things. In some cases they help with drought tolerance and provide other services. So we just don't know. This is still kind of an emerging field. As hard as it is to believe that a fungus, it's a kingdom fungi, this organism can get inside of an organism that's from a different kingdom, animals, or plants in the case of this cordyceps. As hard as it to believe that really does happen, do you really think that's happening? As hard as that is to believe it's happening and has evolved, it's evolved more than once because there's other groups of fungi that are even much more primitive. The zygomycetes, they're much more primitive than the ascomycetes. They've evolved the same behavior as well. Things like Entomophora musi kills flies and explodes out of the body with spores. This is a good time of the year to see this creature. If you have ever seen in the window of your house, usually in winter time, because that's when flies like to come in because it's warm and they get stuck there, then they want to go out, so they head to the window. Have you ever seen in your house a fly like stuck to the window pane, not on the sill, but stuck on the window pane? Many people have seen this. So you probably thought this fly was zooming around your house. It doesn't understand a pane of glass. So it's flying, it's top speed now because it's going to get out. It was flying at such a velocity, hit the window and just like exploded. I mean, that's ridiculous. That didn't happen. What did happen was this fly was in your house and it already picked up this zombifying fungus and was sitting, was flying around and it gets tired and it lands on the windowsill. It can't figure out how to get out. It wants to get out. The fungus now takes over and says, climb up as high as you can and grab on, and then, I'll take care of the rest. Kills the fly and it explodes. If you look around that dead fly on the window pane, you'll see a powder halo around. And that's the spores of this zombifying fungus. Isn't that wild? So I used to see this all the time, even as a kid. No idea what was going on, and well, that's what's going on. So this is a good time of year to look for them at your house besides, probably should clean all the dead ladybird beetles and everything else off the windowsill too. So do I have time for one more tale, or should we stop it? Okay. So if you're thirsty and you need another beer, don't worry. Get up and get a beer. So so maybe one more story. This involves mycorrhizal fungi. So when you see a lot of the big mushrooms that we like to collect as food, chanterelles, boletes, russulas, lactarius, amanitas, etc., most of those big mushrooms that come out late in the season in the fall, those are mycorrhizal. You pluck them from the soil. They weren't actually growing from the soil. Unbeknownst to you, they're mycorrhizal, growing from the tips of trees. They are a symbiotic partner. They're obligated partner with the tree. You can see where the fungus is attached to the roots. It's really hard to do with full-size trees. You can dig around, but you're really not sure what's going on. The best way to see what's going on is if you have the seedlings. These were bristlecone pines that I poached from New Mexico and brought home to my home in Illinois, where I planted them. And on a little seedling, you can get the entire root out. So this makes it easier to see. If you go to the tips of plants, like these little seedlings, you'll see the roots look moldy. And they're even kind of fat and fluffy. This is the fungus. So these are bristlecone pines, so this fungus could be Amanita muscaria. They're very common with bristlecone, but it could be some other things. Anyways, that's where its partner lives. Believe it or not, when you see those mushrooms, they're attached to the tips of roots. Here's what's going on. So again, one other thing that if you learned anything about living creatures in school when you were a kid, you learned that, okay, so this is how a plant works. There's a stalk, and there's branches, and then the green stuff on the plant that photosynthesizes and makes carbohydrates. Underground, then there's the root. The root brings in the water, the nutrition, etc. Well, that's not really true. The root really doesn't do much of anything except hold the plant down so it doesn't blow away. All of the water, nutrients, all that stuff coming in is actually coming in from the fungus. It's mycorrhizal fungus. And you can demonstrate this with a seedling again. These are pictures in all kinds of different biology books with little seedlings growing in a pot up against a plate of glass. So these seedlings, the root tips extend only out to here. That's as far as the roots go. These are root tips to maybe like right here. That's the root. All the rest of this stuff, that is not root. That's fungus. So you can quickly see a lot more surface area by this fungus going out into nature and bringing in stuff. In a golf course or your lawn or something where you water, fertilize, not so important. The fact that the plant maybe kicks out the fungus, we don't know. But in normal natural settings where nutrients are much limited, desert areas, tops of mountains where there's not a lot of nutrients, not a lot of water, these fungi are super important. Most fungi don't make mushrooms that we can find, but a lot do. And again, the fungus actually literally grows into the tissues of the tree, like you see in this little cartoon. And what happens is it brings in the goodies and the water that it gives to the plant. The plant can photosynthesize and gives the carbohydrates to the fungus. So it's a really good mutualistic symbiosis. Again, just to recap, what things are mycorrhizal? Pretty much all plants you know of, except for brassicaceous things, certainly all trees, and likewise a lot of the mushrooms that include truffles and russulas and lactarias and amanitas, all the bigs, cortinarias, which is a huge group, tricholomas like the matsutake here, lactaria are everywhere, all kinds of boletes, almost all of which seem to be mycorrhizal, chanterelles, and even somewhere else in the mycorrhizal. So really a lot of our favorite mushrooms are mycorrhizal. So what's this mean? This means, why can't people just grow more of those, or grow boletes, or grow chanterelles in a box? Wouldn't that be easier? Well, this is why. You can't grow them. You could grow their host, possibly, in your yard, their host tree, and then maybe they'll fruit. But you can't just stick them in your yard or in a box and get them to grow. So in fact, in the plant world, a bewildering number of plants require mycorrhizal partners. And likewise, a bewildering number of fungi seem to be mycorrhizal. A lot of Ascomycetes, a lot of Basidiomycetes, and as it shows, probably all tree species and nearly all of the plant groups are mycorrhizal. So pretty cool. But there's a whole bunch of things in the fungal community that when I was a student learning them that were mycorrhizal. Turns out it ain't necessarily so. Here's an example of this bolete. Everyone's heard of this guy here. Gyrodon oleoides, the ash bolete. You've heard of it, right? It grows with white ash trees. You won't hear much of it anymore because white ash trees are going to go extinct because of an invasive beetle, unfortunately. Okay, so this is a bolete. So, of course, it's mycorrhizal, which stands to reason. You always see it in late summer and fall growing around white ash, even in street trees, on lawns, golf courses. It's super common. And, you flip it over, it looks like a bolete. Well, it isn't really a bolete, and it isn't actually mycorrhizal, but it is associated with the ash tree. So what the heck is going on there? Most of you have seen this mushroom, right? Okay, so what's going on there is it's not mycorrhizal. There's a bug that lands on the ash tree, climbs down the stem of the ash tree, digs down onto the roots, and gloms onto the roots. It's not going to last very long unless this fungus is here. This fungus attacks this bug stuck to the roots that's sucking away. It forms a gall around it. You can find this yourself. These galls are these little black peas here. You dig up the mushroom carefully, you find these little black peas. So that mushroom is actually attached by a hypha to a single one of these insect galls that's got a single bug inside, sucking away on the roots of the tree. Isn't that crazy? So this bug, it's a symbiote of the tree by virtue of making a pathogen, a parasite. And the only way it can make a living is by partnering with this fungus. And of course, this is the only thing that the fungus can do too. It does it really well though. It partners with this bug and it lives off of the juices of the tree coming through the bug. So isn't that cool? This photo up here on the top was photographed by Dan Moulter. This one was photographed by me on someone's lawn in Denver, across the street from the Denver Botanic Garden. And so we just come out of the CMS, the Colorado Mycological Society Mushroom Show, which is always the weekend before the Telluride Mushroom Festival. And everybody's hopping in my car. I'm like, oh, wow, there's ash boletes. And like, oh, yeah, we've seen this before. What are those? Like, oh, really cool. Oh, yeah, so they're about to dig them up. I'm like, hold on. If you dig it up really carefully, we can find this gall. And of course, I told them the story. And all the while, we're transfixed on pulling these things out and looking for these little peas. unbeknownst to us, here comes the homeowner coming out. You know, why are you digging my lawn? And so there's the hole. So we had to hightail it. So everyone in this room, if you haven't done something like that or pick questions from someone's lawn, you will. And you know you will. It's happened. It happens. So okay, so maybe we'll stop there. That was the last of the stories since I'm used up like an hour and 5 minutes. So anyways, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So do we have time for questions?
Sure.
And even if we don't, I can be back signing books or selling books or talking about books, and you can ask questions then. We want to do it that way. Everyone wants to just get here and come see me. Maybe that'll be the enticement.
Yeah.
Britt, your book is titled Fungi, Nature's Decomposers. And then you just talked to us a lot.
Yeah.
And how did that? So what happened there?
I was expecting that from somebody. Maybe. So this book, Lives of Fungi, Nature's Decomposers. So that was already picked out by the publisher as things go. And I tried to convince them that, I'm really fascinated by symbiotic situations with fungi. There's lots of every chapter has plants and animals and other fungi that are partners with fungi. Lots of weird stories that I guarantee you no one's ever heard before. Not that I didn't make them. So I'm like, I would love to do the book, and they had like what all the content needed to be, the amount of ascomycetes. So anyway, they had like all this, how many words, the whole thing. They have a linear, that's what publishers do. And I said, but the thing is, it'll be like 80% symbionts because that's what it is. And so they basically like, well, we'll see. And so, okay, so here comes, because I tried to get them to change the title. So here comes the cover, different covers. Like, so the thing is, I don't want it to be called decomposers, but you're insisting that, okay, that's okay. All of the cover fungi that you have as selections, none of those are decomposers. So I'm going to get dinged from everybody on this. So they ended up showing me a couple of pretty pictures, and one that I'll set it on was the schizophyllum, which I thought was really cool because I love that mushroom. It has a lot of interesting things about it. It's the superhero of genetics research, believe it or not. So in this room, most of the animals in this room, there's probably other animals, but most of the animals in the room are humans. Human animals, there's 2 genders. Schizophyllum has 28,000 genders. Now that
Personal problem.
yeah, pronouns and all that go way out the window. So a lot of people are like, why would you need 28,000 genders? I'm like, given your choice, wouldn't you want to be a species with 28,000 genders? Here's what: at the end of this talk, all of us could go to a bar. It's going to get weird real quick. All of us could go to a bar, or you go into a bar. At the end of the night, half the people could possibly go home with half the people and make baby, individuals of your species. I guarantee you, schizophyllum walks into a bar, it goes home and makes babies because there's 28,000 different genders. The chance of it meeting up with the same gender of its kind are vanishingly small. It's a really cool thing if you like to reproduce.
I do have a question about. I don't think I understand what you mean when you say 28,000 different genders. Can you help me understand?
Yeah, different mating types. They're opposite genders. They can get together as haploid types and make a diploid. But the fungi sexual reproduction is actually way more exciting than that, just because fungi, maybe for the most part, maybe most of the time, we don't really know, don't even do sexual reproduction. I don't even know why any of them, frankly. The mushrooms that you saw in the woods today, probably none of them, the spores that they're making, probably will amount to nothing. Because the fungi are so successful at getting around by asexual reproduction. I don't even know why. These big amanitas, because I specialize in them, they're beautiful. I honestly don't know what the point of that is. It's got to take a lot of energy of the fungus to do. And why? Probably none of the spores will mount it.
Maybe they do it for fun.
Maybe. That's why some humans do it, I think.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Some aspect of I don't know the specifics that we did.
Yep. So the question was about breathing in schizophilum spores. Can they be hazardous? And so actually a lot of different fungal spores can be hazardous. People that work at mushroom farms, especially around things like pleurotus, which make tremendous amount of spores, they all wear like breathing apparatus and stuff. So you can have an anaphylactic response, allergic reaction, or to any fungal spores. Some, though, it's worse than that. Some can actually germinate inside you and cause a pathology. For sure, things like penicillium and aspergillus, if you're immune compromised, they can get inside your lungs and germinate, and it's disastrous because it's really hard to almost impossible to treat. Schizophilum is one of the few basidiomycetes that makes mushrooms that also can be pathogenic. And I'm not kidding when I say this. We had a medical microbiology book, because it mostly was bacteria, in our lab when I was a doctoral student. And I saw a picture in there of the schizophilum fruiting off someone's face. So there was a lung infection, and it said the infection also was in the throat. And it like migrated up through the skin, and there was a fruit body coming off the person's face. Totally ridiculous. Was it edible? You had to ask. So as weird as that is, it's been documented the infections with schizophilum a few times. So it's a known thing. There's a lot of other ones that are weird one-offs. And the next, not the issue coming out right now of Fungi Magazine, but the one that'll come out in April, in the editor's pick section, that's where the editor-in-chief has a roundup of some of the most exciting stories of mycology from mycological literature that you might otherwise not see. So there was a fungus, it was a polypore, like an ash polypore or something. I forget what the heck it was. It caused an infection in this Indian mycologist, and it was the first ever document. It's kind of gruesome how this was discovered. Of course, the doctors didn't know what it was until they started cultivating it, and then they see mycelium and stuff, and it was, because it didn't react to antibiotics or anything like that. They kill bacteria. So, I think given the opportunity, a lot of these things could happen. So when they asked this one mycologist, who's an expert with tropical pathogenic fungi, what's going on there, because it seemed far-fetched to me. This guy was saying the thing is with warming climates, we're starting to see, not a lot, but more and more cases of weird fungi that normally are not pathogenic on humans starting to become pathogenic. And why is that? This guy reasons that with the climate warming, it's selecting for warmer tolerant fungi. And so, as I mentioned at the outset, maybe very, very briefly, the most common pathogens of plants are fungi. Most common pathogens of animals are bacteria. We get a lot of bacterial infections, not many fungi, maybe on skin and toenails, and that's about it, not very many. And so the reason it's long been believed that fungi are not that good at being pathogens of animals is because we have a high body temperature that's just a little bit outside the range. When you pasteurize and sterilize stuff, when you're cooking whatever, it takes a boiling temperature and even higher to kill a lot of bacteria, higher than boiling temperature. Water that's like 165 degrees Fahrenheit is hot enough to kill all fungi. So they're not nearly so tolerant. However, with a warming climate, this scientist reasons fungi are being selected to live in slightly warmer and warmer conditions to the point where now stuff that was close to being thermotolerant to being a pathogen now may become thermotolerant. So if you're a lot younger than me and you're in this room, in 20 or 30 or 40 years, remember this, because you might be hearing someone say, "Oh, we didn't have these things, just a few decades ago that now we're attacking humans." That kind of weird to think. So, anyways, where did I get way off topic?
That was the premise of The Last of Us on the show.
Oh, was it? So I never actually saw. Did everyone watch The Last of Us? And I was the only one. I was the only one of us that didn't see The Last of Us. So is that an Emma Knight on your shirt, by the way, or are you just happy to see it? That's a destroying agent. Yeah, it's beautiful. So that was the premise. So it got warmer and allowed them to become pathogens.
This is how they talk about why they became.
Well, that makes sense. It couldn't happen in such a short amount of time. Evolution to jump between, arthropods that's across classes of organisms. It would take probably billions of years for that sort of evolutionary. But that makes sense. I mean, arthropods are.
They probably talked about that.
Yeah, maybe. So I always wonder. now how did they explain this? So I actually did try to explain. Okay, well that's clever. I never watched it. So.
I'm in April. We'll be coming back around here to do. We'll be flying in a truffle expert for a talk and a walk. And I, for one, think that a splendid hospitality table full of truffle flavored snacks is enough reason for a talk alone. So stay tuned. All right. Thank you, everybody.